you guys heard a British accent, a North American accent, and now a Greek accent, okay? Let me. Don't worry. I'm an expert on this thing. If there is one thing that professors of engineering know how to do, is PowerPoint presentations. Okay? I have two presentations, one within the other, and so because of the shortage of time, I'm going to forego the in-between. I'm going to go through it at breakneck speed. Now, I'm the author of The Color of Oil. Everybody's selling their books, okay? Mine was a national bestseller for 23 weeks. And I am unabashed about it, in the sense that all this whole brouhaha that you hear is really a full frontal attack on the energy industry. And as a result, let me show you a couple of numbers. This is from the devil incarnate himself, ExxonMobil, okay? Now, when I was a young professor, I used to separate good engineers, those who could integrate and those who could not. Since then, I have reduced my expectations to those who can multiply with a calculator and read a graph. I've given PhDs for less. So, first of all, let me show you the first graph, then the second, then the third. I don't want to put you on the spot. I ask this question, I give a lot of presentations to board of directors of major multinational guys. What percent of the world energy demand comes from hydrocarbons? Who knows in this room? What percent? Yes, sir?
97.
Not quite, you are exaggerating, okay? You are an alarmist. 87%, okay? This is oil, gas, and coal. Now, I have a trick question. What percent of the world energy demand came from hydrocarbon in 1973? When the Arab oil embargo, when OPEC, a cartel, used oil for the first time to affect a political aim. What part of that came from hydrocarbons? It's a trick question. The answer is 87%. Now, by the year 2030, and these are the forecasts not just from Exxon, but also from BP, from Petrobras, from the IEA, the International Energy Agency, the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, a division of the DOE of the United States, while the world energy demand will increase by 50%, from about 400 quads for the engineers in this room, this is quadrillion BTUs, 10 to the 15, to over 600. Isn't this ironic? In this era of alternative energy rhetoric, the world energy demand will still depend by 87% on oil, gas, and coal. Now, lest you haven't understood these graphs, the middle graph fits on the yellow of the first one, and the last one is that little sliver that you see in the second graph. That little sliver is solar and wind. And isn't it ironic that what the press wants to talk about is solar and wind, which will never account for more than 0.5% of the world energy demand over the next century? It's just physically impossible that that would happen. We will always be dependent on hydrocarbons for decades to come. Now, the United States Congress just passed an energy bill. Most of it fueled by the rhetoric of anthropogenic global warming, and we're supposed to do biofuels. Well, first of all, corn-based ethanol is supposed to account for at least twice as much as what we are using right now by the year 2022. This is, by the way, just some numbers. People hate me when I put numbers on national television. If we use all the corn we produce in the United States, all of it, to produce ethanol, and nothing for food, it will account for 20% of our gasoline demand. If we use all of the soybeans produced in this country to produce biodiesel, it will be about 4% of the diesel we use right now. And yet, of course, you don't get any number like this in the New York Times or any of the other newspapers talking about energy. On top of that, ethanol has a negative energy balance. It's the biggest scam that there is in the energy business. Do you know why all of the presidential candidates in this country have become born again ethanolists? It's because Iowa was the first primary state. Okay? Now, it gets worse. In the recent energy bill, there is something called biofuels from cellulosic ethanol. This, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't even exist. It's equivalent to mandating that every child in the United States born now should grow to be up to 6 foot tall. I have had a hell of a problem being only 5'6". Okay? As a result, it would be good if everybody grows to be 6 foot, except we don't have the technology for that. This is what the United States Congress has actually mandated. So, my first will and testament, there are no alternatives to hydrocarbon energy sources in the foreseeable future. Get it out of your mind. This is all a bunch of bunk that you hear, okay? Now, let's talk about climate change. In all of my presentations, I give about 50 talks like this all over for pay, right? By the way, contrary to what I'm doing over here, okay? It's a small check, okay? This is a highly politicized issue. And by the way, I talk to a lot of hostile audiences, not like this one that appears to be already relatively friendly. Make no mistake, I give talks in about 50 countries the last few years. And the entire rhetoric of global warming is a full frontal attack on the United States and to some extent the energy industry because of its profoundly capitalist nature. Often, there is a confusion between what is deliberate, by the way, what is anthropogenic, and what it is not. The climate goes up, quit using hydrocarbons. That is the corollary, the refrain that you use. By the way, I have had, and I'm repeating this challenge to all of you here, I am a trained chemical engineer before I became a blah blah professor. And by diabolical coincidence, I did my master's of radiation heat transfer. And I have had for the last 5 years, 30 graduate students at the University of Houston, desperately seeking one peer-reviewed heat transfer paper that shows causal relationship between 350 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. Use anything, the Stefan Boltzmann law, the spectrum of absorption or anything like that. If you have a paper that says this, send it to me, Scout owner. I'm going to send you $10,000, no questions asked. By the way, my money is safe. Such a paper does not exist, but if you find it, here is your chance. Of course, who am I? If I were to tell you, like most of other speakers in this conference, the middle is near, relax. You don't get impressed. If I tell you the end is near, repent. You get impressed, and I sell a hell of a lot more books. Now, what I have done, and I'm going to go through briefly because a lot of people have done it. I have one of my co-authors, Dr. Sheena Shea from University of Wyoming. She did a rather exhaustive study on literature sources. For example, the snows of Kilimanjaro. People telling us that the snows of Kilimanjaro is the first indicator, okay, that they have melted because the troposphere is warmer. There is, and I'm not going to go through any of these things, by the way, because I don't have any time. You can read it in the CD. But there are papers that say global warming is causing it. There are papers that say global warming could not cause the snows of Kilimanjaro melting. There are papers who are talking about hurricane intensity and occurrence have been exaggerated and are going to be accentuated because of global warming. And there are, what do you know, recent papers suggesting that in fact global warming will cause a decrease in hurricane occurrence and hurricane intensity. There are people who are talking that the Arctic and Antarctic ice is going to melt and it's going to inundate this a la Al Gore by 25-foot seas. And there are papers, including, incidentally, from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel that are suggesting it's going to be on the order of a few centimeters. Who should you believe? I think, I tell you this, the problem with all of this is, I count them as three problems. Number one, it's shameful in the future perhaps to be a scientist. Because one of the worst things that are happening right now for the John Q public out there is, in fact, that scientists are a bunch of idiots. That is what the common person thinks because of these presumed consequences that the science is supposed to say that is going to happen. But let me tell you some real economic and legal issues. Those are the second issues that I'm worried about. How many of you know, or can you guess, how many wells would it take, do you think? And I know something about drilling oil wells, okay? How many wells do you think it would take to sequester CO2 for the uninitiated in this room? Sequestration implies the following. We capture CO2, which is not easy to begin with. We either compress it or liquefy it, also not very easy. And then we pump it down whole wells. And I want to preface this by telling you, when you pump against a closed system, this is not enhanced oil recovery where we inject CO2 and we recover from the other end. We're going to be pumping so that we pressurize the formation, the injectivity will go down, okay? With all of that preface, I have the following question to ask you. If you go to the EIA's or the IEA's web pages, you're going to see CO2 production today and CO2 by the year 2030. Subtract the one from the other, it's going to tell you how many billion tons of CO2 will be produced based on expected energy consumption. Okay? Now, gather all of that and inject it into wells. How many wells do you think we need to do that? Anybody has any notion? Here is the answer. 1.7 million wells. Ladies and gentlemen, these more wells that have been drilled in the entire history of the oil and gas business and still functional at the cost of about 7 trillion with a T dollars. You see, people hate me when I put numbers like that, okay? By the way, there is something else also that goes with this. Every time that in a conference of pro and con characters, what's the first thing they hear? They're going to tell me that I am in the pay of oil companies. First of all, this is not true. But I have some news for you. Oil companies actually like the rhetoric of global warming. They like the rhetoric of peak oil, and they like the rhetoric of alternatives. It may sound very Machiavellian, but here is why. Wind and solar, wind is $200 a barrel of oil equivalent. Solar is $2,000. Biofuels are infinite since they are a negative energy balance. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason we use oil and gas is not because a dark conspiracy headed by a dark knight by the name of Dick Cheney. The reason we use oil and gas is because it's the most efficient, most readily available form of energy. Guess what do you think is going to do to the bottom lines of oil companies when by government fiat, by hook or by crook, mostly by crook, we force on the American and the international public the notion that it is good for them to pay 3 times the energy that they pay, either by taxation or by misrepresentation. The oil companies will have a field day. ExxonMobil's profits, which are already $40 billion, the largest profits of any corporation in the history of American entrepreneurship, will double because of all this nonsense. And they have jumped on this bandwagon. No-name companies, solar, natural gas, wind, and hydrogen, and as an afterthought, oil is oil. Now, I downloaded the profits of this no-name company. They made last year 265 billion, 300 million. They spent 300 million on solar in 6 weeks. So I'm a good engineer, I divide the 300 by 6. Okay, that's about $50 million. It would affect the last 2 figures of their cash flow. The rest of it is from the afterthought, oil is oil. Now, there is little question, by the way, that global warming has generated considerable scientific inquiry. Now, unfortunately, science has been hijacked by political agendas, and in furthering these political agendas, the potential impact has been exaggerated to contradictory and illogical conclusions that are intended to impress, primarily to cause alarm. These motives of some the motives of some scientists surely must come into question. And let me end, since I have 1 minute here, on 3 other events that I didn't get a chance to put in my presentation right now. Maybe I lost a slide. The US District Court in the Southern District of Mississippi just threw out a class action suit against 26 energy companies for the damage wrought by Hurricane Rita and Katrina. This is not a joke, this is a fact. Here is the logic. Energy companies produce oil and gas, we burn oil and gas, we produce CO2. CO2 causes global warming. Global warming causes more and more intense hurricanes. Rita and Katrina were intense hurricanes. They cause damage, you pay. An Alaskan village just filed a lawsuit in San Francisco because it's sliding into the sea. And the lawsuit is against, I believe, 10 energy companies, oil companies, 1 coal company, and 1 power company because of global warming effects on their village. This is the problem with the United States, for the Americans in this room, because the plaintiff in this country does not pay even in the most frivolous lawsuit. In the UK, that's not the case. And so you're going to see an avalanche of these situations over the next few years. That's why we have an interest to cut them at the butt before they proliferate. Because many companies, to avoid long litigations, companies with deep pockets, not ExxonMobil to their credit, by the way, although I'm not in their pay, I repeat, okay? They will never settle. But some other companies will, and this will create a precedent. That's the kind of thing that we're confronted with. Finally, let me give you this. Not only I'm not a skeptic of anthropogenic global warming, I think it's absolute unadulterated nonsense, by the way. I'm way to the left of what everybody here is even willing to debate. I wouldn't be willing to debate this kind of thing had it not been for issues like the ones I just outlined. Thank you very much.